All right. Ready?
I'm ready.
Great. In that case, I can welcome all of these gorgeous listeners to another episode of Lucky Paper Radio. My name is Andy, and I'm here, as always, with my co-host, Anthony, Chains of Mephistopheles Slinger Maddox.
Oh, I got it right over here.
Are you trying to decide what to cut to put in the chains right now?
Yeah, I also need to sort it. I think I'm just going to cut this otter that I don't have any personal affection for.
Is it the Coruscation Mage? Is that the one?
No. That one's pretty good. I like that one. This is the Bria Riptide Rogue. It gives everything prowess. It's pretty good. Anyway, it's
everything
not as good
being just all your creatures?
Chains of Mephistopheles. Finally, we found the cube that this card goes into, maybe.
I so badly want the chance to first pick it tonight.
It's going to be awful, because it's just like another copy of Voidmere, or another one of these cards that just like shuts your opponent out of the game, but also people are going to be really confused by just the text on the card, and I think that those two are a really bad combination. And yet, where else am I going to play this Chains of Mephistopheles?
I'm trying to figure out exactly how people are going to break parity with it. Like, that's what I'm excited to figure out. Like, I think it's good. I just got to figure out how.
I think you don't. I think you just play it and, like, you dump your hand and then play it turn one, and then you win. But you have to win the die roll first. My hope is, if anything, here's the story I'll tell myself, is I would love for the interaction, the removal to be a little bit more valued in this environment, and having some cards like Voidmere and Chains of Mephistopheles maybe do that.
I thought people were just winning through Voidmere, though. Isn't that the thing that people were doing with Voidmere?
I did that once, and I thought it was super cool, but
I thought lots of people were doing that.
I don't know if a lot of people are doing it. Maybe. We'll
find out tonight in... Well, you're not going to find out in this episode. We're going to finish recording this podcast, and we're going to go play Cube. And maybe you'll find out the podcast after that, what happened with Chains of Mephistopheles. Stay tuned.
This has been Chains of Mephistopheles Corner.
That's a cliffhanger, and that's forward sizzle. You got to have that in a good podcast.
I was sure I was going to be big jar of hot chicken, Anthony, though, so I was all prepared.
To taste it yet. I am so sad I missed your party where you finally unveiled the chicken garum.
It's interesting. It's not like mind-blowingly delicious, but I look forward to your opinion on it.
Hold on. Did we think it was going to be mind-blowingly delicious? Was that
the
goal?
Have you read this book? Have you read the way that Rene Redzepi talks about how delicious all of his ferments are?
No, I've not read that book. No, I mean, I figured it would taste like chicken juice.
Something in between chicken juice and soy sauce. It's interesting. We're going to play with it. We're going to experiment.
Well, yeah, what are you going to do with it first?
First, I had a little soup with it last night.
As in, you just put a little bit in some soup?
Yeah, made a little dashi, some of that, noodles, chicken. I thought it would go well with chicken.
You know what goes with chicken is fermented chicken liquid.
Chicken water.
Hot chicken liquid. Chicken liquid. Chicken liquid's fun to say. You should try it sometime.
Anyway, that's not the hobby that we talk about on this podcast.
No, it's not. We talk about Magic the Gathering on this podcast, and specifically Cube. And specifically on this episode, Anthony, we are talking about my latest dalliance in Cube design, which was inspired by Jane's The Ball Pit. We had Jane on a couple episodes ago to talk about The Ball Pit. We've talked about this cube a couple times. This is Jane's cube where you can play every card face down as a copy of Chromatic Sphere. And Jane also makes you draft 60 cards in 3 packs of 20 and then play every single card you draft. There is no deck building portion of that cube experience. You just shuffle up the cards you drafted and play them. Obviously, Jane leaning pretty hard on the fact that you can play any card face down as a Chromatic Sphere. So any card you don't want in your pool, it's off color, that, you know, is off strategy, that's another Chromatic Sphere for you. My favorite aspect of that cube, the thing I'm most drawn to, is the, like, forcing you to play with bad cards. I mean, obviously you can play them as spheres, but I think we said in the show a couple times before that you often just find that, oh, actually, this card I thought was bad is actually okay right here. It's better than a Chromatic Sphere, so I actually will just cast it.
Sure, you just need any creature to win, and you draw horrible hordes, and you're like, I guess I'm casting this for the first time since 1996.
Yeah, so it ends up those cards actually kind of matter in a really cool way. And, you know, I think a lot of people, what they want out of cube design is making all their favorite weird pet cards playable, right? And a trap that often happens is that you end up building a cube where maybe your pet cards are kind of not the best thing in the cube. It ends up that some other strategy is the best thing to be doing. And I think Jane's sort of brilliant design skirts that by just saying, like, yeah, you have to play every single card I give you. Like, you will play with the jank I've put in this cube. I will force you to.
We say all the time that, you know, Cube is such a great format because it allows you to play with really whatever cards you want. But there is still that last hurdle of you have to make the cards at least appealing enough that your players will still put them in their deck. And I'm confident that you can make that work for just about any cards in Magic, but sometimes it's still tricky. There can still be situations where you're like, I want all these things to work together, and people are just not going to play, Bag of Holding or whatever your favorite janky pet card is. And that's just like the coolest, most literal way to force people to actually put these cards in their deck and allow those kinds of cool interactions that you want to see come up, is just say, you have to put everything in your deck.
Yeah, I think what you said there was really prescient about getting multiple things to work at the same time, right? Like, yeah, you can build any cube where any card is playable and appealing to put in your deck, but as soon as you have, 20, 30, 50, 100 cards you want to each be appealing and have some players put in their deck, it turns out the ones that are the least powerful of those options are likely to be riding sideboards a lot of the time in favor of the more powerful options. It's harder to design a cube where a wide range of things feel mutually playable such that players end up putting them in their decks and just casting them at the same rate. So that's the part of the ball pit I am most inspired by. We've talked before about how a lot of times, at least for us, cube design projects are kind of like a confluence of a couple different things all floating around at the same time. The other thing I've been thinking about for a while, honestly for years, is designing a desert cube. I think desert cubes are fascinating. To be perfectly honest, the thing I love most about them is that there is no cleanup. You don't have to take the basic lands out of the decks at the end of the draft night.
This thing that I'm doing right now that hopefully nobody can hear is pull out all the basics and shuffle the decks back together.
Because you have players give you their full decks back with basics and all, so you're doing that right now. Yeah, I mean, that process you don't have to do with the Desert Cube is very appealing. You don't have to bring a basic land box, which takes up space. It's more cards to keep separated and organized. It's just logistically, it's kind of cool when every card that's in a sleeve is part of the cube. That's the most appealing thing about Desert Cube to me.
For the most part, that's honestly just an aesthetic thing. Do you think that's fair? But that very much makes sense with your vibe and your approach to things.
You say it's an aesthetic thing, does that devalue it at all?
No. That's what I mean. It's not to say that it is less valuable, but it is just a cool aesthetic experience to be everything that's in a sleeve here is playable and part of the cube, and we don't have to distinguish it and sort it into different piles at any point. It's all just this one sort of uniform game substance.
Yeah, I think it does make it practically easier, too. It's just a logistical simplicity
that's fair, yeah.
Makes actually running the game night a little bit easier, running the draft a little bit easier. Obviously, the ball pit is a desert cube because you have to play. Actually, we didn't say that. You have to play every card you draft, and also you may not add basic lands. So the ball pit is also a desert cube. But I was thinking more about desert cubes without sort of rules modifications and just trying to explore that space a little bit. Just riffing basically on the ball pit, the new concept for a cube that I've been tinkering with is a cube where there are minimal rules modifications. As I've talked about before with 100 Ornithopters and other sort of experiments of mine, I feel like I'm really drawn to these days cubes where the cards within them are the thing that is making the cube unique, more so than external rules modifications or things like that. And so this is a cube I've been working on where you draft in regular pack sizes. Normally, desert cubes tend to be drafted in larger pack sizes. I've heard that 18 is kind of the norm, but obviously you can draft in whatever pack size you want, and some desert cube designers will go even higher than that.
Unlike a normal draft where you're drafting 23 of your playable cards, then you can add lands, obviously with exceptions. You're drafting every single card that's going to go in your deck, so if you're playing a normal 45 card draft, there's not a lot of wiggle room. You end up playing most of the cards that you draft, right?
Right, which is why desert cubes tend to go bigger pack size. I didn't want to do that, and the combination of Jane inspiring this very minimal deck building, in Jane's case, zero deck building environment, and kind of showing a way that you can force players to play with a bunch of weird cards, and this idea of a desert cube with minimal rules modifications. Obviously, there is the baseline rules modification that you don't get basic lands. That is unavoidable in Desert Cube, but not having different pack sizes and not getting anything else sort of after the draft is important to me. And so the sort of last piece of this was just the name. We've talked about resonance on this podcast before and about how oftentimes being able to communicate an idea concisely is a big part of the identity of a cube experience, right? If you have a perfectly cohesive cube, but you can't really articulate that in a clean sentence or a name, it can be hard to explain to people what the concept is or get people excited about it. And I was thinking about this cube environment where you are playing a bunch of cards in your main deck you normally wouldn't want a main deck. A bunch of janky suspect cards end up in your pool that you are just forced to play because you only get 5 cuts, right? That's what we're talking about here. You draft 45 cards, play 40 of those cards. And I was thinking about how that's kind of going to force maybe weird creative deck building decisions, or I'm picturing people looking at a card and really stretching themselves quite thin to figure out all right, well, how can I justify playing this card in my main deck? Because rather than cutting just my worst cards, it's more about adding some bad cards to my main deck to get up to a playable 40. And that felt very improvisational to me. And so the name I came up with is just Take 5, which is a famous jazz song by Dave Brubeck that if you don't know the name, you probably know the tune. The idea that you draft 45, you only get to make 5 cuts, calling it Take 5, is what sort of made this idea click enough that I decided to start pursuing it. And then the last piece of this is that I have been making little YouTube videos about my cube updates recently. So any updates to Sacred Geometry or 100 Ornithopters, I'll record a little video just like unscripted of me talking through the sort of cube changes. And people have really been enjoying those videos. It's just basically, you know, what I would write in a blog post, but in video form instead. But I think it's an interesting insight into the cube design process and is more sort of nuts and bolts than we get into on this podcast, because the podcast is more...
a little more abstract, a little more about, you know, principles and concepts.
Yeah, it's a little more presentational, right? Like, this is made for a broader audience where it's like, we're your YouTube video. If you care about this, watch it. If not, whatever. The fact that, like, this is a scheduled thing, I don't know. It's a different kind of vibe than this show is typically. People have really been enjoying them. And I was thinking it would be really nice to get to do a cube update video for a cube that didn't require any prerequisite knowledge, right? Like, the update videos only make sense if you understand the cube concept as a baseline. Otherwise, you can't make any sense of an update video. You have to know what the update is happening to. And I was like, it'd be cool to capture the entire cube design process in a similar style of video. I got excited enough about this idea and was not quite sure where it was going to go, and still am not quite sure where it's going to go, but I was enough interested in it that I decided to make videos about the entire cube design process. And so at the time of recording, there are, I think, 6 or 7 videos, and by the time this episode comes out, there will be more, because there's a little backlog in my brain of videos I want to make about this particular cube concept. If you want to watch, you know, me talk through every aspect of this and go on Cube Cobra and add all the cards to the maybe board and the cube list and then make some cuts and do some test drafts, like, there are videos of all that stuff out there. So that is the concept I want to talk with you about. And first and foremost, I mean, I don't know how much you have been paying attention to the YouTube channel or any of the conversation in, like, the Discord about this, but I've
been staying away from it just so we can get this fresh take on the
good.
podcast.
That's why you've intentionally been avoiding it. What was your exposure to this idea before I just gave you the same 10-minute intro that everyone else listening to this podcast just got?
I think a lot of it flows pretty naturally from just the little bit that you've said here or there to me. And I do feel like there's sort of something in the cube zeitgeist right now with this interest in no deck building cubes. I know Jane obviously has the ball pit, which does it in this really interesting way where you're solving this problem of what do you do with, like, having cards that are just literally unplayable? Or is that a positive tension that you're creating? Or is there, like, a way that your players are mitigating that sort of failure case, that risk? And everything being alternately a chromatic sphere is a really interesting way to do that, but also has huge implications on the way the gameplay is, because there's just so much complexity. You're, like, thinking about color in a different way. I really enjoyed Arlo's concept. She was talking about this on Pack One Slick Ones. I believe the cube is called Goblin Game, and tries to do something similar of just, like, no deck building. You draft, then you take all the cards you have and you shuffle them together. And her solution was every card is red, or, like, in some way, like, if you have a bunch of mountains, you can do something with a card. And I think that eliminating color in that way obviously solves that issue to some degree. You could put in, you know, a card that says, I care about artifacts, and have not a single artifact in your pool. But there's a lot you can do with the choices of the cards you put into the cube within monocolor to solve that problem. I also just find this fascinating, this idea of just, like, I'm going to draft, and then that's it. Like, no deck building. And I don't know why that is interesting, because deck building is also a fun part of Cube, but it's just always fascinating to do something in a slightly different way and, like, cut out part of this experience you're used to and see how it changes things. And I think maybe it is just tickling that part of my brain that, like you describe, is something that I love about playing Cube, is just forcing people to play with the fun cards that I think are cool and are kind of my pet cards. And no deck building is just the most literal way to actually force people to put those cards in their hand. And I think that this is an interesting sort of in-between. We were saying, like, I'm going to do a lot of stuff in terms of the card choices to, I don't know if mitigate that challenge, but, like, to address that aspect of it, the fact that you're forcing players to play with more of their pool, and then have this tiny amount of ability to control your pool that also ties into this kind of, like, improvisational theme. I think that makes a lot of sense.
It was funny, actually. Arlo and I were talking about being inspired by the ball pit and thought maybe we were doing similar things, and then we each designed a thing and we're like, oh, these are not similar at all. But we were both inspired by the sort of minimal deck building or no deck building concept. Yeah.
So in what way are they different? Because I also got maybe a little bit infected and spent a couple hours the other night tinkering on, should I build a deck building cube? And maybe approached it in...
This is huge! You're dropping the bombs live on the podcast. I don't want to say... designing a new cube in 2025?
I don't want to say I'm approaching it a different way because I just stole Arlo's idea basically whole cloth. How do you think that you two solve that in a different way?
Well, I think we were both interested in minimal or no deck building, and also the game's more closely resembling normal Magic, which is just to say that,
right, compared to the ball pit.
In the ball pit, so much of that cube's card choices and the texture of games is about all the chromatic spheres, obviously, and that is by design. But in some ways, I think the no deck building or minimal deck building becomes a sideline. It's like a knock-on effect of the fact that everything is a chromatic sphere. It doesn't feel like one of the main things.
Yeah, right. It's kind of easy to even miss that point where you're just like, oh yeah, everything's a chromatic sphere, and then you're like, okay, I have to play with everything, and yeah, there's just a lot going on when you're trying to evaluate starting a draft in that environment.
Yeah, and I think Arlo, like you said, kind of narrowed the range of what she considers normal Magic to be, to basically put it into a space where everybody's attacking and blocking and playing creatures to the board in this sort of heavily color-focused or color-limited, way. I kind of took a different approach of just saying, all right, well, I'm giving players some cuts, which truly, I'm not really doing that because I think it's better to give people 5 cuts or whatever. It is truly because I think the fewer things you have to explain as rules modifications and differences from a typical draft. I'm trying to hew as close to a normal draft as I possibly can. And the only difference here is just you don't get basic lands. Otherwise, you're still building the same size deck. Something that happens in the ball pit is I'm playing 60 cards. How many lands is that? I don't actually play constructed. How many am I supposed to have? You have these other kinds of knock-on questions that I'm trying to let players use as many of their built-in, I know how Magic the Gathering works, heuristics as possible, and really focus on the new constraint of you do not get any basics and you have the same size pool, so you are really constrained on cards you actually get to cut.
I think that's super, super cool and makes a lot of sense from the standpoint of, I fell into this little rabbit hole and was also thinking about okay, well, do I want to adjust the pack size to make the numbers work? Do I want to adjust the number of packs? And I think that really just breaking those heuristics of okay, I'm through pack 1. I kind of have a sense of how many playables I expect to have for my deck, and I want a third of the number of lands that I expect. And if I'm, below that, I'm going to tune up how much I'm valuing lands in pack 2. If I'm higher, that's kind of a weird thing here where I might need to, start taking lands less highly just so I have enough playables. But trying to do that adjustment on top of adjust my base heuristics, which how many basic lands or how many lands do I want at all in my deck, doing both of those things at the same time, I think is too overwhelming. And maybe it doesn't sound like it is, but it's really a lot to be doing both at the same time.
I think so too. I learned from my Degenerate Microcube that rules modifications have a big cost for a regular play group, and especially for trying to grow that play group and play with different players. And I just stopped bringing that cube out because it was a lot to explain, and players would often have the experience that we had Ben describe on the show from Lords of Limited, where he was I got halfway through the draft and then realized what the draft was about and wish I could just start again. I don't want people having that feeling, if I can avoid it, the first time they're drafting one of the cubes I've designed.
Yeah, and there really are those 2 layers of translation. In that cube, you were trying to make it all about these really specific card interactions, so people had to understand the pool of cards they were drafting from. And then you also had the deck building change of now we're drafting 15 card decks, and doing both those things at the same time. There was synergy, there was reason that you made those choices to have those 2 things happen together, but it was just a lot of translation for people to do sitting down and drafting it for the first time.
It's even more than 2 things, honestly, because it's okay, 15 card deck, what does that mean? How many lands are in a 15 card deck? If I'm drafting 2 packs of 10, how many playables am I supposed to have after the first pack? I'm only wheeling 2 cards. How does that change things? And I'm only seeing 2 packs. So the person sitting to my left and right are equally important rather than the person sitting to my right being more important. It's all of a sudden just everything sort of dominoes into nothing being familiar anymore at all, except for knowing how Magic cards interact once they're cast.
Totally, and it's a different space from just oh yeah, I'm at the end of pack 2, I have about 17 playables. There, I feel comfortable. You don't have playables in the same sense in that environment because every card just cares about individual specific interactions. So it's like, well, I could get this one card that turns on 5 other cards in my pool, or I might have nothing if I don't see that. So it's like super, super complicated.
And it is important, I think, to mention the Degenerate Microcube here, because as a person that owns a number of cubes, this cube has to fit in like the stable of the cubes that I own, at least in my head, for like how it is different and like distinguishing itself from others. You know, I've got Sacred Geometry, which is my cube that is all focused on like clean fundamental magic. And so that has like scratched every itch for, I just want to play good, clean Magic, or I want to bring a cube out that I know is, you know, welcoming to new players in the playgroup or whatever. Like, I've got that base very much covered in my own stable. I've got 100 Ornithopters for getting really wacky if we want to, like, totally melt people's brains and, like, force them to recontextualize a bunch of things. I've got my old school cube. I've got the Bun Magic cube for, like, you know, more powerful Eternal Magic offerings. And this one, I think, is really going to, like, scratch that, like, combo itch that I think the Degenerate Microcube had in it. And I don't mean combo in the sense of, like, infinite combos, in the sense of, like, you have to combine cards synergistically to get value out of them. I think I want this to be a pretty janky cube. And that obviously stems from the fact that everyone's deck is going to be pretty janky because you only get 5 cuts. 5 cuts is so few. It is so many fewer, I think, than people think it is initially. Like, you're going to get 3 cards in the draft you had literally no control over, just handed to you last pick. So you had no choice over those cards whatsoever at all. You just got handed them.
That's a powerful framing. So then you get 2 real picks.
So you get like 2 actual cuts in a sense, assuming that none of those last picks are actually playable, which is not the case. I think a lot of the times the last picks will be playable in this cube. So everyone's deck is pretty janky. And that's, you know, on top of the fact that in addition to drafting playable cards, you have to draft a mana base, which is already complicated and hard. You have to have the right number of lands or close to the right number of lands. So you might dedicate 2 of those 5 cuts to lands, not because the lands you took are bad, but because you just took a few too many. And so you end up playing almost all of the non-land cards you draft. Like, it is a really, really tight constraint, which just means that everyone's deck is going to be kind of janky. And in that kind of janky space, I want the way that you win the game to be not like, okay, well, then I just, you know, cast individually powerful card. My cards are better than yours. I drew and cast a powerful one. Or, you know, I played a big creature and you had no answer for it, and so I just attacked you a couple times. Like, I don't want the way games end to be like on the back of individual cards. I want them to be on the back of combinations of cards, and especially making pretty bad cards shine is one of the things I'm aiming for here. One of the ways I've been describing the cube is, which I think is maybe descriptive. That was a very stupid sentence to say. Keep it in, Matthew. One of the ways I've been describing the cube is, I think in a lot of regular drafts, you get to the end of the draft, you're looking at your deck list and you're like, dang, you know, this card is so cool. But if I'm honest, I think I'm supposed to cut it because I should just not try and do the cool, synergistic, weird thing that this card is capable of, because it just won't be that consistent. And so instead, I'm just going to play, you know, another C- removal spell or some random 2-drop to fill out my curve, because this cool, ambitious, you know, weird card is probably too narrow to actually be good. I think that feeling is one I'm trying to take in this cube and turn it into, like, actually those are the cards that your whole deck is about. Like, you are forced to play those kinds of cards and forced to look at your pool and say, normally I'd want to cut these 6 cards, but I can't because I only get 5 cuts, and so let me figure out how to make these 6 cards somewhat playable and, like, put in ambitious, you know, synergies that are not going to happen that often, but will get to happen sometimes, and put in ways to deal with bad cards in my hand that I don't want, just like random discard outlets or whatever. Like, put in ways to, like, do things with these cards so that the times that they actually get a chance to go off, they can justify their inclusion.
So, like, for example, I'm going through the draft. Every card I end up with, I feel like I probably need to end up with in my deck. So take, for example, we've got Phyrexian Dread on the list. If I end up with that last in pack 1, I'm pretty actively looking for a way to do something with Phyrexian Dreadnought, because then I'm turning a card that is just gunk in my deck, that is just a dead card, into something that actually does something. Is that kind of what you're describing?
Yeah, I mean, Phyrexian Dreadnought, I'm not sure if you intentionally chose this, but, like, this is, like, one of my favorite cards.
That's the one that stands out for me as, like, this card can be a complete nothing.
It is one of my favorite cards in all of Magic, and it is definitely one of the cards I specifically want to make playable here. I think it's also a good case study in, like, the kinds of synergies I'm pursuing, because this cube does not have Stifle in it. It does not have Dress Down in it. It does not have these, like, you know, Vision Charm or whatever. It doesn't have the sort of most efficient ways to just put Phyrexian Dreadnought into play. The way that the cube works is not that you get Phyrexian Dreadnought and then you're, like, on the lookout for Stifle. The way that it works is you get Phyrexian Dreadnought and then you realize over the course of the draft that actually a couple of the cards you had in pack 1 do technically work with Phyrexian Dreadnought. They do something with Phyrexian Dreadnought.
Okay, so I can fling the Phyrexian Dreadnought and then choose to sacrifice itself?
Yeah, for sure.
Okay, great. What else can we do with Phyrexian Dreadnought?
Like, for example, there's
Altar of Dementia?
There's Altar of Dementia's too good, not in there. That's two on the nose. I want these to be more creative than that. I have Mirror Weave in there, for example, is a card you can do with Phyrexian Dreadnought.
Okay, that's kind of cool.
That's, 2 and then hybrid white-blue, so 4 mana total. And it turns every creature in play into a copy of target creature to end of turn. So you just have some number of creatures, probably not that many. You play Phyrexian Dreadnought in response to a sacrifice trigger, you Mirror Weave it, and as long as you have a couple more creatures than your opponent has untapped creatures, you probably just kill them outright with that. Greater Good is in there. That does something with Phyrexian Dreadnought. Now,
that's pretty similar to Altar of Dementia, but for yourself.
It's for yourself, and you get to also draw cards, which is fun. So these kinds of weird interactions are the things I'm looking forward to. It's not in there right now because I haven't gotten around to making the video. This is part of the thing that I'm part of my impetus here is making all these videos, which means that I can't just go edit the cube whenever I want, which has been stifling. But I'm going to make a video soon.
Because you deliberately chose not to include
That's true.
Stifle.
I'm going to make a video soon about another enabler I'm adding for Phyrexian Dreadnought, which is Sundial of the Infinite, which is, I think, also a very perfect exemplary card for this cube. For those who don't know, this is a 2-mana artifact that you can pay 1 and tap it to end the turn, but you can only activate it during your turn, which is very strange. It's a very, very weird card, and it doesn't have any infinite combos, at least not that don't require 4 or 5 cards. But what it does have is a lot of weird things you can do with it that you just have to it's a weird thing you have to find something useful to do with, right? It's the kind of card where you're going to look at Sundial of the Infinite in your pool at the end, and I want you to go, actually, there are 4 to 6 cards here that do something with Sundial of the Infinite, so this is actually kind of maybe playable or maybe not as bad as one of these off-color cards I can't do anything else with. And one thing you can do with it is just end the turn with an Enter the Battlefield ability for Phyrexian Dreadnought on the stack. The turn is over now. Everything is exiled off the stack. You get to keep your Dreadnought.
I mean, that sounds like fun to me. I'm curious, you're sort of describing this network of different kinds of card relationships. Do you want to, I could see this being somewhere on a spectrum of people are going to draft stuff, and then at the end of the day, they're going to be oh, there's actually a bunch of ways that these interact with. Or you could be on the other end of the spectrum where people are really struggling to find those interactions and look for those kinds of combinations during the draft. Where on that spectrum, if that makes sense at all, are you trying to land here?
I definitely expect this cube to be very complicated. I think this will be probably my new most complex cube of all the cubes that I own, and I'm okay with that. And it's nice to have a space in cube design where I'm giving myself the leeway to be as complicated as I want, which, may just be a reaction to my most recent cube being Sacred Geometry, where I'm very fiercely limiting complexity in every way I can think of. And here I'm just no, I don't care. I'm playing weird, cool cards, and it does not matter how complicated they make the draft or the games or the deck building. This is a space for that. So mostly I'm just giving myself permission to make it be a really complicated environment. And I hope that different players engage with it differently. I don't want, for example, this to be the cube where you have to know all of these weird kind of esoteric rules interactions to have any kind of success at all, right? I expect a lot of players will not realize how Sundial of the Infinite works with a negative ETB or ability on the stack, right? They'll just think, oh, I guess I do this in response to my opponent trying to remove one of my creatures, then I can end the turn, which is true. That is the thing you can do with Sundial of the Infinite. So it kind of in some ways makes your opponent use all their stuff at, sorcery speed or at least on their turn. But I don't want you to have to know that to be successful. I want you to also be able to draft a kind of normal-ish deck without necessarily having all these interactions. And then in that case, I hope maybe you discover them in the play, right? Maybe you play Sundial of the Infinite because literally you're well, you know what? I'm a red-green deck and I have 5 cards that are completely off-color that I just cannot play. And so even though Sundial of the Infinite, I did not draft it. I got it late. I didn't prioritize it. I wasn't thinking about the interactions. You just end up with it. And then maybe you discover oh, actually, I can end the turn with the sacrifice ability from an unearth thing on the stack. And then I just get to keep my unearthed creature, right? You might just find some of the weird things that Sundial of the Infinite does because I force you to put it in your deck. I want there to be both. I want there to be people that, are taking these weird cards highly in the draft and then in the draft looking for the weird rules interactions for how they can pull things off that are strange and powerful. And I also want players just to be forced to put something in their deck and then realize actually, this is fine. This maybe does something. That experience is what I had in the ball pit, which is what I think was really fun, is being actually, I do want to cast this card, even though in deck building, I would have said I never did want to cast it. And that can also just be a card that looks kind of bad, right? One of the cards I'm weirdly excited about here is one of the original Two-Brid cards, Tower Above. Is that what it is? The green one? The green, 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 or 2/2/2. So either 6 or 3 mana or anywhere in between, depending on how much green you spend on it. And it gives a creature you control +4/+4, Wither, and target creature must block it this turn if able, which I think is actually like kind of maybe cool and powerful, but is the kind of card that I think most players would not ever be looking to put in their deck, but then you'll be like,
I guess I do want to wither your Phyrexian Dreadnought and prevent it from, or force it to block at this point.
I want this to be a cube where you're like the white-red deck, and you're like, I guess I gotta play Tower Above. This sucks. I don't want to put this card in my deck. And then you cast it, and you're like, actually, that didn't suck at all. That was cool, right? That is the experience I'm overall trying to create.
Do you worry, I mean, and stop me if you don't want to jump into talking about mana yet, or at all.
We definitely can.
Do you worry at all that there might be sort of like a similar multi-layers of challenge happening at once where you're both trying to find these interesting, complex interactions between cards and then also just trying to draft a functional mana base? Because
yes,
I could definitely see in the Desert
I'm
Cube
definitely worried about that.
I need mountains and plains, and I ended up with 3 swamps, and now I'm just playing 2 of these swamps as wastes in my deck.
One thing that is different about this cube from most Desert Cubes I've seen, I'm sure not all of them, I'm sure somebody else has made a Desert Cube like this, is that I do not want mana to be a like limited resource or like very scarce resource.
Talking about sort of the resonance combined with the rules change, very often people will make the lands in a Desert Cube difficult to find or not very powerful or cost a lot of life or some other constraint just to enhance that sort of vibe.
I don't want that here at all. And so right now, I think I actually have on average 20 lands per player. I think I have almost 160 lands in the cube. And I have the advantage as a cube designer of knowing the entire cube is going to be drafted. So I probably have a few too many lands right now. I have not actually done a draft with 7 other humans, only bot drafts, which obviously they don't know what's going on. So I can't learn about things like that from that particular experience.
The bots are especially not very useful in something that is very unlike a normal draft.
You know, I think the reason that most Desert Cubes often make the mana bad or painful or scarce is that that's what they're about. That cube is about like, hey, you don't get basic lands in the building portion, and so instead now basic lands are really high picks, and you like are going to completely reframe the way you think about lands because you would give anything to not play this like crappy wastes in your deck, but you just have to because you need enough lands. And I don't want this cube to be about that. I want this cube to be about the weird non-land cards you end up playing. And the way I'm doing that is by limiting the cuts. And it's way easier to say you don't get basic lands than to say you must play X number of the cards you draft. And so you only, you know, like this is the only way to get there, I think, in a way that works. So I'm trying to make the mana much less stressful than the average Desert Cube. I want there to be enough lands going around and enough colored sources that like everybody has like a functional, if janky, mana base and like doesn't have to worry about like I'm at 13 lands and I only have 5 picks left in this whole draft. Like I now have to literally take lands over everything. I'm not trying to put people in that position.
Right. I mean, you also have a lot of fairly flexible cards like some of the DFC lands and things with basic land cycling, things that can just sort of mitigate that in other ways. I honestly could see that sort of mana issue and card combinations issues lining up in similar ways where you're just like, well, I wasn't really planning on playing red, but I ended up with 2 mountains last pack. I guess I'm going to take this red card now.
Correct.
And it's like that, this similar kind of like drafting the deck around the mana base that you're building.
Yeah, definitely. That's exactly what I'm imagining. Like I said, I don't want the cube to be about the scarcity of lands, but like lands is definitely going to be a theme of the cube. And as you mentioned, I have DFCs, I have, lands with channel abilities, I have creature lands, I have like lands that do stuff that basically can be spells, so that maybe you actually do want to play 20 or 21 lands in your deck because, 6 of your lands do things and they can basically also be spells. But you asked if I'm concerned about that being complicated. I am. I think it's going to be pretty tricky. Like I said, this is a space where I'm just allowing myself to embrace a little more complexity, and we'll see how it goes, and I'm sure I will learn from it. And, one of the big lessons that Jane took away from the first big batch of drafts of the Ball Pit at Inland Northwest Cube Fest was she just made the mana base way more simple. Like, she had so many other weird, techie, fringe, colorless lands in the Ball Pit and was just eventually like, these are not worth all the complexity that players are spending in draft and gameplay, trying to figure out what their mana does, and she swapped out a bunch of them for just like, I think 20 copies of Zhalfir and Void. I expect I will maybe end up doing something similar. I think right now I'm on actually a different number of basic lands in each color depending on the color. That number may go up. I may just end up having more basics in there to simplify the mana base a little bit, but I do want this to be a place to play with funky lands. There's certain lands that come to mind as like the kind of lands I want to be good here. Another sort of 2-card combination I keep thinking about at the front of my mind is Pendlehaven and Swiftblade Vindicator. I want people to do Pendlehaven, Swiftblade Vindicator things in this cube very badly. And by just you taking Pendlehaven because it's just a land and you need a land or you need a green source and you didn't take it because it does this like funky thing with 1/1s and then ending up with, 1/1s with good keyword abilities that you can then buff with the Pendlehaven. I want that sort of texture to extend to the lands too, not to be sort of constrained to just the non-land cards.
I don't know. You say that like people are not excited to draft Pendlehaven, and I've lost to Pendlehaven enough to know that card.
How many times have you lost to Pendlehaven?
Once.
What cube was this?
Max's cube.
Wait, is Pendlehaven in French vanilla?
No, it was in his the notorious time when I was most wrecked and salty. Don't worry about it.
I just want to say officially on the show, we love Max. Max is great. Poor Max at Cube Night the other night said, I was talked about on the show this week, and it wasn't negative. We like Max. Max is great. He's just very good at...
He's very good at things that I'm very bad at.
Yeah, and that's very annoying. But that's a good trait of his, not a bad trait of his. What other questions do you have? I can keep blabbering about other themes I'm imagining here, but I'm curious to know what you think about other sort of obvious issues you see with this list or questions you have about like where I'm headed with things.
I guess more than where you're headed, I'm just curious about where you are in the process. Like, is this something that you feel pretty confident in? You're ready to start drafting soon? Or are there's still questions that you're answering before you want to put it in front of people?
Oh, so many questions I'm answering. Yeah, this is really early on. And normally, like, I don't know, I'm trying to be better about not being precious about ideas. And I think having the platform of the podcast like we do tends to make it feel like, oh, it's like an announcement that there's a new cube design and like I'm presenting it to the world. And like, this thing is a huge mess. It is not even close to draftable right now. I think someone asked recently and I said, like, I think maybe we are like 30% of the way to what I would consider like the first human draftable 360 that I would consider actually trying to assemble in paper.
That feels counter to the advice that we usually give to people, which is, just get it in front of people and play it, and you'll learn so much more from that. Like, what's the difference here? What are the things that you're concerned about that you still want to work on?
Well, so let's just say, like, we give that advice to people because so many people
fall really far on the other side of the spectrum.
Well, yeah, so many people think that like, oh, like I don't have any, like I think if I built this cube right now, I think it'd be fun. We'd have fun drafting it, right? Okay,
then what's the problem?
It's a lot of cards I don't have, and I think I can refine it quite a bit before I get to drafting it in paper with people. Would it be like a faster process if I ignored all the time spent acquiring and sleeving cards and just started drafting this full on with people and like learning that way? Probably, but I would rather, for myself, given that I already have plenty of cubes and have a cube playgroup and I'm not like trying to get over that hurdle, I am more interested in like making sure that like the ideas in my head are at least manifest in some form before putting it in front of people to like get feedback on a thing that is so roughly formed that it doesn't really have edges yet.
That's, I think, really important context that, yeah, we are in a playgroup with 50 cubes. It's not like the limiting factor is number of cubes. And for a lot of people, it's like, yeah, we have a playgroup, there's 2 cubes, and having something new in the mix is probably much more valuable.
Right, and I stand by that advice of like, look, just get out of your own way and start playing Cube. We're going to go play Cube tonight. Like I'm doing that. That's not my problem. I don't actually have a problem. I'm doing great. But,
wow, no problems.
Well, I got plenty of problems, but just not that kind of problem. I think this is still very, very messy. There are big questions I have not answered for myself, like what is the distribution of lands that I want? What is the texture of lands that I want? There's a lot of cards that are just fully undersupported right now. Like they are effectively just traps. You cannot combine them in any way that is like useful, and you'd be like tricked by taking them, putting them in your deck. There's a lot of cards I want to put in that I have not found room for yet, and I haven't also like done a proper audit for like the interaction density for like how much interaction I want. Like there's so much to do, and even though this is like a platform and we have like an audience or whatever, like this is not a finished cube. It is a mess. I'm just a guy and I just want to talk through it a little bit. That's what I'm doing on the YouTube series, which is obviously going to be linked in the show notes, but I thought it was maybe far enough along that I at least know I'm going to continue working on it until I get to something playable and draftable. But I think it's going to take a while. Like part of me was wondering if I thought I could maybe have the first version of this ready for Shoebox, and I don't think so. I think realistically it will be too difficult to get it to a good place that I'm happy with and also acquire all the cards before May? I should know that. March 13th to 15th, 2026. I was right the first time.
That does make a little bit more sense to me, that your goal is also building a cube that is just a collection of your favorite cards is, I think, one of the best ways to build a cube and will almost always result in something fun. And that's just not exactly what your goal is here. Your goal is to create this sort of like complex network of a bunch of cards fitting together in a way that you can give people that experience of like, oh, I drafted a bunch of stuff that doesn't make sense, and then realizing, oh wait, somehow the Infinite actually does do all these like weird complex things. Yeah, sure. From that standpoint, it does make more sense that there is a lot you can do with that theory crafting and just thinking through the list very hard that hopefully will translate to a fun end product.
And like a lot of fun is going to be this stage of the project. Like this is not to me like a before the cube phase. Like
sure.
This is like designing the cube in the abstract is kind of part of the fun thing. Let's talk about a couple other categories of cards that I feel like I need help from the listeners or from you in sort of figuring out how to get more in there. So I am really drawn to cards, obviously, that have like modality and especially a colorless modality. So like a good example is like morphs. Like you can put a completely off-color morph in your deck because it's a 3-mana 2/2. It's bad, but this is a janky environment where maybe you just want to play a 3-mana 2/2 over a completely off-color card, right? Again, I'm trying to be forgiving to players within the restriction of you only get 5 cuts. I don't want people to be stuck with like literally unplayable things in their pool that like the card does absolutely nothing. And so a card like a morph is like a good consideration for a card that does something, right?
Or I think that the perfect example here for me is Scrapwork Mutt, because that was also when I went into a similar little rabbit hole, literally the first card I thought of, and I was like, well, obviously we got to have Scrapwork Mutt. So
yeah, this is clearly a Scrapwork Mutt cube, but that's even like too good, right? Like Scrapwork Mutt is great, but I'm talking about like, how do I make sure that, you know, some of the bread and butter effects in the cube also just have colorless buyout modes.
Sure, yeah.
So, like, for example, a removal spell that I'm pretty excited about and feel like is going to stick around is a Feto Exterminator. It's a 2 and a black 3/1 creature wizard that has morph for 3 and a black. And when you unmorph it, target creature gets -3/-3 till end of turn.
One of my favorite illustrations in Magic, I think. I have this in my irregular cube just so I can look at it.
Oh, really? Do you?
Yeah.
Yeah, the illustration's sick. Another small thing here that I love about this card is that it is a wizard for Step Through, which has wizard cycling. So
wow.
Love to put Step Through and a Feto Exterminator in my deck with barely any black, just so I can then tutor up my removal spell and then splash it off of like a chromatic sphere to like unmorph it. Like that is what this cube is going to be all about. So this card's great. It checks a couple boxes for me, right? I think having cards that do multiple things is going to be really important to getting all of the effects I want in this cube. And so a Feto Exterminator both checks the box of colorless buyout mode and also checks the box of is a removal spell. And the removal spell part of it is not colorless, and that's fine, but it can be both. In a black deck, it's a removal spell, and in a non-black deck, it has a colorless buyout mode.
And I think especially going back to that idea of like your mana base, you don't necessarily have a ton of control over, so you might be playing base red-white, but you just have some incidental black sources because you need to play that white-black land, that Godless Shrine in your deck, just as it planes, but every once in a while you'll be, casting out one of these colored spells that has a colorless buyout.
That is exactly the thing I want to come up a lot in this cube. So I have, a lot of the lands that, tap for one color once, like your Tendo Ice Bridges or whatever. I want the full cycle of original eggs to be good here, because those are just cycling cards.
We don't have a cube where those are good yet.
We do, but it's a very different environment. I like the eggs, and I specifically want you to be able to do like eggs stuff. I love Second Sunrise and Faith's Reward is what I've learned through all the cubes I've put those cards in. They're so fun. And all the synergies that come from playing and sacrificing a thing and the incidental mana fixing or mana not fixing if you're playing an off-color egg. But, obviously the eggs are playable. You can put them in any deck and they just cycle for 3 mana and make you some mana that may or may not be on or off color. But I want them to also give you those incidental splashes so that you can, very occasionally, in your deck with 2 black sources, your Feto Exterminator is actually great and not just a 3-mana 2/2. Iker Slick, great example of a card that also just has cycling and is a removal spell, so you can just cycle it away if you're not playing black, or you can cast it as a removal spell. I'm trying to find removal spells and like card draw and card selection and things that have colorless buyouts or alternative modes that will allow me to get other sort of edges off the cards.
Yeah, the idea of also including a lot of one-shot mana sources is kind of interesting, or colored sources, because it'd be one thing if you're just playing a bunch of fetch lands and triomes and it's like, great, now I have perfect mana, the rest of this game is on easy mode. Instead, you kind of have this tension which feels in line with everything else you're describing here of, well, I have this egg, but I know I have one black, spell that I care about in my deck, so do I want to crack this now to dig deeper in my deck, or do I want to wait and maybe potentially use that mana later? It does kind of fit together a little bit to me in terms of like improvisational vibe.
There's a couple other just like random things that I stuck in here that just felt right on vibes. One of them is the Soulflare Chromanticore combo that Ryan Overturf was actually posting about on Twitter. Apparently this was a thing in some constructed format, maybe standard, I don't remember what, some time ago. But Soulflare is a Delve creature. It's a 6-mana 4/4, 4 black with Delve, and it gets all of the keyword abilities, basically, of all of the creatures it delved away. And so if you delve away a thing with flying, it gets flying, and the same goes for most of the keyword abilities. And if you don't know Chromanticore, which I think is just such a cool card, this is full Wooburg for a 4/4 enchantment creature Manticore that has flying, first strike, vigilance, trample, and lifelink. It also has Bestow for 2 and Wooburg, for 7 mana total. Just a freaky little guy, but obviously crazy in combination with Soulflare, where you make a potentially 2 mana, plus you delve away 4 cards, and you get a 4/4 with flying, first strike, vigilance, trample, and lifelink.
So you're just planning to bin this with your Scrapwork Mud or something?
There's a lot of discard in this cube, because if you can discard for value, that's a great way to turn any card into something, right? Like Scrapwork Mud is a great example of like, turns any card in your hand into a new card if you want. You basically gave a card in your hand cycling for 0 mana when you play your Scrapwork Mud, which lets you do something with that off-color or off-strategy card. There's a lot of that here. Zombie Infestation is another card that I'm kind of married to. You just discard 2 cards to make a 2/2 zombie, which is an awful rate. Like, that's a terrible rate for an effect. But this card has seen some play in Constructed because some decks can draw their entire deck, and then you can make a whole pile of zombies. There's some budget MTGO deck I know that like was basically a ton of lands and like maybe a Balustrade Spy or some effect like that, and then zombie infestations, and you could just, make a bunch of zombies. Here, I want you to play it with like things you actively want to discard, like things with madness or things that want to be in the graveyard, and also things like Life Mellow, where it's like, okay, I get to, draw 3 cards every turn, but they're just lands, and then what do I do with those lands? I just turn them into zombies at a funky rate. But anyway, I have a lot of discard outlets, and so something like Chromanticore is a great example of like, why you can put Chromanticore in your deck. One, either you have enough mana you can actually cast Chromanticore, which I want a lot of decks to be like, if the stars align,
sometimes
I could maybe
do it.
Like, I want some decks that are like, I have 1 white source and 2 black sources, and my otherwise, what's the Jeskai deck? No, I said white. Why is this so hard? Teamer deck. I have 1 white and 2 black sources in my Teamer deck. Every once in a while, I will actually just get to cast Chromanticore, but mostly what I'm doing with it is discarding it to then some discard outlet or whatever to then delve away with Soulflare or something similar. There are other kinds of cards in that space that I have not yet explored, but am planning on exploring, actually on a call with Ryan Overturf. So he'll be on one of the videos on YouTube talking through this archetype and how to sort of make that be a thing. But yeah, just like 2 weird cards that, like, do they have anything ostensibly to do with the restriction of the cube? No, they're just weird cards that I think could have a home here.
I think that Soulflare is also just a very good card.
Yeah, I think Soulflare is cool.
So are there any themes that you have, like, explored, tried to make work, and you just can't really, or individual cards that you're struggling to fit in here?
I have not abandoned anything yet. The cards I have not put in here that I've wanted to are cards that I just think are probably too good, that will just make the game all about themselves. So, like, one example of a whole cycle of cards that are perfect by my described goals in terms of being like colored cards with good colorless buyout modes are all the prototype cards from Brothers War, but they're just all insane. Like, even the uncommon ones are like kind of crazy powerful. And so I don't want the colorless cards that you get like kind of free late in the draft or that you like end up putting in your deck begrudgingly to be like the best cards in your deck. Like, I want the best cards in your deck to be things that do have high color requirements and like, force you to have drafted a particular type of land base. And then I want kind of the bad filler to be colorless cards. And so I initially had all of the Masticores in here because the Masticores are colorless cards that are all discard outlets, and they're also just got cool swaggy vibes.
Seems on theme.
But then I just felt like the best creatures in the cube are these, 4 or 5 Masticores. And so I think I actually should just cut those and instead put cooler colored creatures in, like high devotion creatures in, and make the colorless cards a little more janky and like fillery. Like, I took the Masticores out and I put in Phyrexian Obliterator. Yeah,
I was going to say, like, the idea of, I have this cool 6-drop that I kind of got stuck with, but actually it's pretty powerful, so maybe I do want to figure out a way to be able to make double black or 4 black if you end up with the Obliterator.
And the Obliterator is a great example of, like, that's definitely, once in play, the best card in the cube. It's cracked. It's really, really strong. But it should be pretty darn hard to get into play here because it requires 4 black pips, and you would have to have drafted every single one of those black sources and all the other ones in your deck, right? Like, I don't know what the Frank Carson math is for being able to cast a black, 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 black card on curve, but I would guess it probably is like you need 16 black sources in your deck or something to do that.
Or a single Elsewhere flask, and then you're fine.
Or a single Urborg, which is also in the cube. Or a Lake of the Dead and one other swamp. I guess you need 2 other swamps because you have one to sacrifice when you play the Lake of the Dead. So anyway, those are some of the cards I have not been able to fit is like some of the better colorless cards. I'm like, actually, I think the games are going to become too much about you, and I want the games to be decided by the colored cards people had to cast rather than the colorless cards for the most part, I think.
I've cracked open the maybe board, and I see some of what you're talking about. I also see some cards like...
It's a big maybe board.
Bizarre Trade Mage seems perfect. Is that just like a 3-mana, 3/4 flyer that really digs into your deck? Is just too much here?
This list is so rough right now. That totally fits the goals. You'll notice there are tons of cards that fit the goals in the blue section there because there's just a lot of good cards that loot through your deck in blue. Right now I have Magus of the Bazaar just because I think it's a little cooler than Bizarre Trade Mage. It's a 2-mana 0/1 that just taps for a Bazaar activation repeatedly rather than just being a big creature on its own. That certainly fits. I could definitely see going there in the future.
Why is Progenitus in the maybe board? That seems like the perfect fit here.
In reality, I think there's actually not that much you can do with it, unfortunately.
Yeah. You put it in your pile of 5 cards and you say, this is my commander, Progenitus.
One of the cards I'm excited about here in terms of like making whatever's in your deck playable is Scroll of Fate. This is a 3-mana artifact that you just tap to manifest a card from your hand, which it's a commander card from a while back, and real OGs will remember that there was a small chunk of the Cube community that when this card was spoiled thought it was utterly broken. They were like, this is a 3-mana planeswalker that makes a 2/2 every single turn, and some of us were like, yeah, but it costs you
lose
a
card. Yeah, so that's kind of different.
Anyway, some people were very excited about this card. It has turned out to not be super powerful, but like the idea of, for example, manifesting a Progenitus from your hand and then astral sliding that face-down Progenitus into a face-up Progenitus.
Of course, not ephemerating it, astral sliding it.
Yeah, not ephemerate. Get ephemerate out of here. Astral slide, the cooler Daniel. That is a thing that you could do in this list with Progenitus. But the fact that Progenitus can't be in the yard really limits what you can do with it because none of the graveyard things matter with it. Yeah, I don't know. I think it's just actually a little bit too limited. But the sort of 5-color ambitious card with like crazy rules text, protection from everything, like that is very on theme. Just I think mechanically it's probably a little too narrow.
So Chromanticore is kind of filling that role.
Yeah, Chromanticore is very cool. Like you see Chromat in the maybe board there too. Just another very cool card that that's a great example of like, yeah, that does something here probably. Here's a card I want to talk about that I think might be contentious. I think you probably know the rules text of Hacken Stromgald Scourge.
Hacken Stromgald Scourge. No, refresh me on that one.
Okay, it's 1 black for a legendary creature zombie knight. It's a 3/3. So far, so normal. You may play Hacken Stromgald Scourge from your graveyard, but not from anywhere else. You cannot cast this card from your hand. You can only cast it from your graveyard, but you can cast it from your graveyard. As long as Hacken is in play, you can play night cards from your graveyard, and when Hacken is put into a graveyard from play, you lose 2 life, thus making it more difficult for you to just loop Hacken indefinitely because it costs you life each time. I think this card is so cool. It's from Cold Snap, which, by the way, there's so many cool Cold Snap cards. Like, Cold Snap was so weird. It was like kind of the first future sight. There were so many weird cards in Cold Snap. This among them. This is in the list primarily as a card that you want to discard because I mentioned there are a lot of discard outlets, and this is a card that you actively don't want in your hand because you can't do anything with it in your hand. You're not even allowed to cast it. You have to somehow bin it, and then you can cast it as a 3-mana 3/3 from your graveyard. So it kind of like draws you a card to discard it, and that card is itself from the graveyard. It does have this other interaction, though, which I'm pretty excited about, which is that the changeling spells, of which there are a handful in Magic's history, instants and sorceries that have changeling, those are night cards. So you can cast those from your graveyard with Hacken, and they go right to your graveyard again because they're spells, obviously, so you can just do it over and over again. The 2 I have in right now are Nameless Inversion, which is 1 and a black for target creature gets +3/-3 until end of turn and loses all creature types, which is a great example of like it's a bread and butter effect that also has overlap with one of these weird synergies I'm like pursuing. So like it's also just cool art. I'm also feeling very driven by art for this cube. Like I feel like Soulflayer and Nameless Inversion and like these cards all kind of just have a weird vibe that I'm kind of into.
Can we put Yixilid Jailer on that list?
Yeah, Yixilid Jailer, exactly the vibe of what we're going for here for sure. Hacken, a lot of people that have looked at Hacken have thought, well, this card's only good if I have a bunch of knights.
Oh, really? I was just worried about you always have a 3/3 that I can never kill.
Yeah, a lot of people seem to be looking at the card and seeing a thing I'm not seeing. Like, obviously, it's good if you have other knights because you can play them from your graveyard, but on its own, it's just a card that you can't kill. It just keeps coming back. Like, I think it is, if you have enough discard outlets in your deck and black mana sources, it is just a good card generically. And then the combination with Nameless Inversion honestly might end up being toxic.
That's
a
little bit problematic. And that's one of those things that I would be more concerned about, just people's reactions to that, because they would have this happen to them, be like, what the hell? This barely makes any sense. And then think, well, I passed both of those cards. I'm an idiot. And I just didn't know this like really specific weird card interaction.
There's going to be a lot of that in this cube, I think.
That's what I would be most concerned about with things like this. Honestly, when I look at it, I'm thinking, okay, here's a card that says very explicitly, put me in the graveyard. I think, if anything, that is kind of leading players to think about the kinds of build-arounds that you are trying to get them to think about. So I feel like that particular piece of rules text is actually kind of a positive.
Oh, I mean, just to be clear, like, I'm not listening to those people that think this is a knight,
Okay.
a knight synergy card. Like, this card is going to be in the final list. It is, like, one of the reasons to build this cube. Like, it is such a weird card. It doesn't belong anywhere else. I want it to belong here in this weird environment. But yeah, I'm curious to find out if Nameless Inversion is just too toxic with it, which does kind of bring up the question of grave hate. I think the graveyard is going to be a very active zone in this cube. I love the sort of iterative, sort of slow trickle grave hate, like the Scrabbling Claws, and I think Scavenging Ooze is actually probably just too good here.
It would be very good here.
I had the thought of like maybe the fact that the activation is limited to green mana and the fact that you got to like work a little harder for your mana sources.
Yeah.
Like I think Lion Sash is definitely too good. That's just better than Scavenging Ooze as a baseline, and has a colorless activation. I think maybe it's white. I don't actually remember. It doesn't matter. It's too good either way. Scavenging Ooze is like on the fence. It's currently not on the list. I think Withered Wretch is the right balance, right? That one, just 2 mana 2/2, pay 1 to remove a card with no upside, is cool. I'm probably also going to add this card Patchwork Crawler, which is 1 and a blue for a 1/2 that you can pay 2 and a blue to exile a creature card from your graveyard and put a plus and plus. I guess that's not grave hate, as I'm saying it out loud. It's only your graveyard. It'd be so cool if you could exile from other people's graveyards. Anyway, I got to figure out what graveyard hate is going to look like. I want it to be interactive, but I feel like it might be problematic such that in order to have enough grave hate that Nameless Inversion and Hacken is not incredibly toxic, it would also just kind of nerf so many other strategies that are not anywhere near as spiky as that particular one. So I'm not sure. That's an open question. One of many open questions for this cube.
That's something I always struggle with, because grave hate is it's swingy in so many ways. It sometimes just doesn't matter at all. Sometimes you just have a dead card if you're trying to be able to interact with the graveyard. And then it's also, so much of it is just so absolute. It's like, okay, you have this one card that just says, I don't have a graveyard anymore, and we're done. And there are very few things that fall in that sort of incremental space that I think we both enjoy.
And then here also, that incremental space has to be like the right rate, because I do think Lion Sash and probably Scavenging Ooze are just a bridge too far. Like, they're just too good here.
Do you have any other creature type matters things here? Because I actually think that's really cool to have these kind of low volume, but pretty high reward creature payoffs, where it's like, oh yeah, I'm in the middle of the draft, I got Hack On, let me find 2 or 3 knights to make this a card that's giving me some value. And I could definitely see a lot of things that fall in that similar space and just give you another axis of things to care about.
Right now I don't, but I would like to. I would like there to be more things that make Nameless Inversion. And the other one I have right now is, actually, I think probably one of the best cards in the cube. It might not stick around. Formless Genesis, which is 2 and a green for a Kindred Sorcery Shapeshifter that makes an XX colorless Shapeshifter creature token with Changeling and Death Touch, where X is a number of land cards in your graveyard, and it has Retrace. It already just lets you keep casting it from the graveyard as long as you have lands. And with Hacking Out, you can just cast it without retracing. You can just keep casting it because it just keeps going to the graveyard and it is a knight.
But you want to discard those lands that don't do anything for you and make bigger.
That's
guys.
True. If you might just be discarding lands even though you do have Hacking Out, because it's better for you to retrace it. Yeah, I want those cards to have other sort of applications for the type mattering than just Hackin', and I think I will find other ones as I continue to work on the list. But that is my goal for those eventually. I do think that Nameless Inversion, hopefully, is just good enough removal that like it doesn't just wheel to the Hackin' player every draft. Like, I want that to be a high pick for anybody playing black because it's just good removal. That's the kind of rate I want for removal this environment.
Right, that makes sense.
Threading that needle is going to be hard, and one of the goals that I have for this cube for sure. This felt like a very unfocused episode, but what can I say? I'm at the unfocused stage of this Cube project. If you want to follow along in detail, definitely check out the YouTube page. I think by the time this episode comes out, there'll be a couple more videos up there, and there's a lot of me just talking through what I'm trying to do with this list.
I think it's a really cool concept. I both really like this idea of, taking that idea of playing with kind of janky cards that you might not necessarily opt into in most drafts, but then put it into this context of, actually, it's about these like janky combinations of cards, not just individual pet cards, Veers. And this idea of just no deck building Cube is very appealing to me, and I think a lot of Cube designers right now, so curious to see where this project goes, and I wish you would put it together sooner.
I'm curious to see too, and maybe I'll proxy some of it up. I did pull the cards from my collection that I thought might have a home in the Cube, and there's 80 here or something, so that's something. But it includes Lion Sash, which is white to activate, it turns out, so still, I think too good.
If you already commented that it costs white, I knew that.
Yeah, we all knew that. We knew that so much. Anyway, that's the end of this episode of Lucky Paper Radio. Check out the YouTube page if you want, and otherwise comment on this video or in Discord if you have other suggestions for the Cube, because it is very much a work in progress. All the music for this show is produced by DJ James Nasty, and the podcast is edited by our good bud Matthew. Thank you, Matthew, for your editing prowess. All the Magic cards are made by Wizards of the Coast, and this podcast is made by thinking really hard about Magic cards and then speaking into microphones about it. Anthony, thank you for the gift of friendship and for the gift of Cube.
Thank you for sharing this new Cube with me. I'm really curious how, if I end up pursuing this project of mine further, how similar it ends. I'll spoil it just a little bit if that's fair.
Please.
So I was listening again, literally just stealing this idea from Arlo. Her idea was, let's just cut it down to red so that we are still drafting this Desert Cube, but everything is playable.
Just to be clear, they're not all red cards, but they all have a colorless or red mode.
Right.
So
that's a good clarification.
Yeah.
So I was thinking we can make that work with 2 colors. So I'm just making the 2-color version of Goblin Game.
Is it green-white?
It's red-green. I don't know why I chose those colors, but we'll try and parse that out at some point, I'm sure. But I feel like I'm actually fairly firmly in between that Cube Goblin Game and your new Cube Take 5, where it's like I'm trying to do a little bit of that, force you to make these janky cards work, or even if it's not a janky card, Isochron Scepter is one that I'm just like, okay, I want you to have this card that is powerful, and then just be on the lookout for something to play with it, or like
that's one of the ones I'm going to put in this Cube too, I think.
And so I think that there's going to be a little bit of both of those here.
The imprint cards are cool because they effectively make a card colorless, all the imprint cards.
Right, yeah, it's like giving you something else to do with that card.
Yeah.
I don't know. I think it's a really interesting space, and I also am a little bit jealous of your solution of the 5 cuts, because figuring out how to make the math work, because I do agree that sticking with 40-card decks is, I think you've convinced me of that through this conversation.
The thing I like about this conceit is that it is very flexible, right? Like, within make only 5 cuts, you could go a million different directions, right? Like it is not like a prescriptive sort of thing. This is just my sort of take on it. We'll see if it ends up being the right amount of cuts. I feel like it's the right amount of control where it's like, okay, well, this card is just truly like, it'll let me put in cards that do risk being like truly huge liabilities in your deck in some density, because you do get some cuts. You're not just like forced to play with whatever, but so few cuts that you are going to be forced to play with cards you otherwise wouldn't want to play with. And Isochron Scepter is a great example of a card that I want to avoid people being able to put like the classic groaners under Isochron Scepter.
Or
like,
what's the you can't cast spells this turn.
Well, yeah, certainly not Orim's Chant, but like any like hard counter spell or even hard removal spell, like removing any creature under Isochron Scepter, I think is miserable. I looked at my list. I currently don't have a hard counter spell or hard removal spell at 2 mana or less.
Can't put a Feto Exterminator under Isochron Scepter.
Actually, one of the closest things is Nameless Inversion, but it's only 3 toughness, so at least there's some room for you could still resolve some other creatures. But like, here's what I'm dreaming about for this cube. Sundial the Infinite is coming in. It's not in as of the time of recording right now because I haven't had time to sit down and make the video about adding Sundial the Infinite, but it will be in there. One of the things I'm going to add along with it is Final Fortune, which is the instant red that says you take an extra turn after this one, then lose the game at the end of that turn. You get to Sundial the Infinite to end the turn with that lose the game trigger on the stack, so it just becomes Time Walk in your Sundial the Infinite deck. And now you can put it under Isochron Scepter, and if you have Sundial the Infinite and Isochron Scepter with Final Fortune under it, you just get to take infinite turns, which is cool.
Cool.
And Final Fortune is a great example of a card that like you also just cast in an aggressive deck. Like you'll just play that. Like I'm forcing you to put that card in your red deck, and you'll be like, all right, well, it's weird, but I guess I'll just hold on to it and then cast it when I'm a turn away from winning, right? Like it's perfect. Also, Ideas Unbound. Can you picture the art on Ideas Unbound?
Think so.
It's like the big fish guy sucking the ideas out of some guy's head, like a big kind of like lionfishy thing, or like
days like that.
angler. It's blue for draw 3 cards,
and then discard your hand or discard 3 at end of turn.
At the end of turn, discard 3. Which again, Sundial, you can just with that trigger on the stack. Sorry, it turns over now. I can't do that. Great example of putting like bread and butter effects in the cube that also have these fringe synergies, so that they become more appealing in certain contexts. There's also a cool card called Discontinuity. It's a time stop, but it costs like 5 mana less if it is your turn. So it's just like a one-shot Sundial for like a blue mana, a single blue mana or something. Or you can pay 7 mana just to end your opponent's turn, which is kind of cool.
Pretty neat.
Anyway, I'm real excited about it, as you can tell, but also so messy still far.
Yeah.
Got a lot of figuring to do.